All right. So settling back into a comfortable meditation posture, letting your shoulders release, relaxing your jaw, softening the belly. So as we begin to sit, we first make an effort to just kind of arrive, to settle. And even as we do that, we can see what resistance there is to that, or what energy is there that's obstructing our capacity to settle. And we don't want to get into a struggle with what is. We want to gently release, gently settle. And if that really isn't available or possible, then we apply mindfulness and a sense of acceptance to whatever does not want to release, whatever does not want to settle. So even as we begin our sit, there's this spirit of investigation to feel what is present. What is the energy in the body? What is the mood in the mind? And then connecting with the breath. The in breath, the out breath. And we can feel the breath at the nostrils, the touch of air coming in and out, or the feeling of movement in the belly, rising and falling, whichever point is easier to focus on. the breath is a subtle and simple thing to experience, to be aware of. Subtle sensation. It actually demands that we pay close attention if we're going to feel it. It's not obvious or intense most of the time. So that effort to feel the subtle sensations, that is meant to actually help to focus the mind in order to be mindful of the breath. We have to kind of ignore or quiet, cut through the louder, more obvious experiences, especially the thoughts. Thoughts are very persistent. They can continue to run along even when we don't want them to or when we aren't really interested in them. They seem to have a life of their own. And so as we make the effort to pay attention to the subtlety of breath, we have to be careful that we don't develop a conflict with thoughts, or that we aren't sort of frustrated with the thoughts. Somehow we have to let them be without just losing ourselves in thoughts. Suzuki Roshi says to just let them come and let them go. So there are clouds passing through the mind, not giving them a great deal of attention, not being bothered by them. There's no need to stop all your thoughts. Just keep coming back to the breath, bringing the breath into the foreground, letting the thoughts pass through in the background. right. Um, so just for your information, I also just got an email from 10% Happier saying that they're gonna post my they're gonna air or whatever my podcast about living kindness on August 11th. So if you're interested, I'll keep you updated about that. Also, I believe next week I'm speaking for Napa Valley Insight. Is that right, Debbie? Yes, you sent me an email, so it must be true. If you if you happen to have the link for that, do you have that, Debbie? You could post it in the chat.
Yes, I will get that.
Great, thank you. So
Mhm.
that's I've been doing a series on the Eightfold Path, and we're on the eighth. We're on the eighth fold, which is concentration. So that should be a fun evening next Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock Pacific time. All right, then. Uh, anything else? Nothing I can think of. So we're in step 10 of One Breath at a Time. Just looking around to see if there's anybody here who hasn't been with us before. So in any case, Todd from Charlottesville. Oh yeah. Hey Todd, how are you? Nice to see you.
How are you, Kevin?
All right. Thanks for showing up. Um, we have been going through my book, One Breath at a Time, since last March, and we're in step 10. So starting to think about what the next move is going to be after this book, but I think we'll probably get well into the fall before I have to decide that. But we're on page 210, a section called Over and Over. And as I was looking through this yesterday, just noticing that it kind of starts out really focusing on the repetitive nature of meditation. I say step 10 is what I try to do in meditation, be continuously aware of what is appearing in my mind and body and promptly let go of the attachments and aversions that form around those experiences. Um, so just, in my sort of the project of this book, which was my first attempt back in 2004 to sort of mesh Buddhism and the 12 steps. This is like typical of what I was trying to do. That kind of creating these correlations or showing these correlations. Hopefully, I'm not creating them. Hopefully, they are there. Um, yeah, and I think it is incredibly helpful to make that connection for an addict. I mean, just again to kind of speak to the audience that I had in mind when I wrote that was, well, this is for people who haven't really gotten into meditation, but they've been in recovery for a while and they want to meditate, but they sort of don't understand it, like the typical thing of like, oh, it's too hard, or I can't stop thinking, and all that sort of misunderstanding of what meditation practice is. Um, but because if we can make that correlation, if you're familiar with step 10, like it's step 10 says we continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. We understand that what that step is saying is that I've got to keep reasserting my effort. I've got to keep stay connected to the process of recovery. I've got to, whenever I find myself going astray, I need to bring myself back. I need to make amends if do something wrong. And so, I'm making this correlation. Well, that's kind of like meditation. When you're meditating, you're trying to stay with the breath, but the mind wanders. So, you come back, and the next sentence I say, but in meditation, I don't stick the label wrong on what appears. So that, when we were wrong, promptly admitted it in step 10, but rather put what I see in the context of dukkha. Is this going to cause me suffering? If so, then I might as well let it go if I can. So, uh, uh, this really, um, I think, is a more helpful way to think about, um, not just meditation, but about recovery, rather than saying like right or wrong. Am I creating suffering? And that is, essentially the our understanding of Buddhism, that it's not so much about the morality of our behavior, but of the suffering or lack of suffering that's caused by it. And that's not to say that Buddhism isn't interested in morality. It's just that we don't sort of see that as the ultimate. You know, yeah, in Buddhism there is certainly uh, a commitment to morality, but we see that. Um, the ultimately freedom comes from ending suffering, not by freedom doesn't come by just being good. Yeah. Um, yeah, this is a fairly long section, and it's got a bunch of stuff in it that I think is useful. Um, the next part that kind of stands out to me here is um, a period of time when my practice seemed to be really unproductive. And I remember this really well. I remember where I was living and sort of my meditation space. I don't, it's funny how some memories are so visceral. And, and I was 2 years sober, and this is, you know, uh, sort of in my own development uh, in recovery, came after having been a serious meditator. But when I got sober, I I kind of put meditation aside, not that I stopped meditating, but that I in some sense, I felt like, "Oh, meditation failed me," which is, interesting, way to think of it, an interesting kind of form of delusion that it was meditation's fault, like, that, if meditation really worked, then I wouldn't have this alcoholism problem. But really, the truth is that I expected something from meditation that I couldn't get, which is I expected meditation to fix everything, and that somehow I was gonna have this spiritual experience that would then make it so I didn't need to drink and use anymore. I didn't wanna, like, have to stop, uh, when I still wanted to, but I wanted meditation to make me not want to drink anymore. That I don't know if that makes any sense, but in any case, when I got sober, I was kinda like, "Oh, I think I better do this sober thing 'cause, my life is kind of a wreck and meditating didn't fix it." So, uh, uh, consequently, I wasn't, in 1985 when I got sober. Yeah, I went on a short retreat in 86, 87. Like, this is, you know, uh, I'm kind of like I maybe would go on like a 3-day weekend retreat, whereas before that I had been on a 3-month retreat and a 3-week retreat and couple of others. And so I was really dialing back the retreat commitment. And when you and frankly, we were talking about this in the Sutta study class yesterday. When you don't go on retreats, uh, I think we were talking about it then. I did another thing. Oh, okay. I was on a podcast yesterday too, so it's probably where I was. Anyway, when you don't go on retreats, your samadhi tends to, your concentration, samadhi, the depth of your meditation tends to weaken. That's just kind of the reality of it. I mean, I'm sure there are some people out there who are just such good meditators that they just doesn't matter. But for us average people, when we go on retreats regularly, we're able to sustain some nice concentration in our daily practice can stay pretty deep, and it's lovely. But, as I say, that just wasn't my focus, which was wise. I didn't need to be going on retreats at that point. I needed to straighten out my life as I was, getting sober. But I kinda hit this wall where I started to get really frustrated with it and talked to my teacher at the time, and he was like, "Well, just focus more on your breath," and that instruction has never worked for me when I'm really off and somebody just says, "Well, just, knuckle down," kind of. What actually works for me is to knuckle up, which isn't an expression, but it's just like to back off my effort and relax my effort and sort of just be a little more easeful. Um, but uh, but as I say here, uh, I also knew that this was just temporary, that was causes and conditions, and if I kept going, that it would come back, and that my samadhi would come back, and that um, I said. It says here, although the memories of pleasant meditative experiences were having the negative effect of making me feel my current practice was a waste of time, they also had the positive effect of giving me faith in meditation. I knew that if I stuck with it, eventually things would change. I also knew that if I gave up meditation, I would never get that piece of equanimity back. And obviously, again, this correlates with recovery that, you get into these places in your recovery where it's like, this isn't working. Like my life sucks, my, uh, I got fired or I broke up my relationship or, you know, things can get really tough. And you think, well, what's the point? Right. And then you go, oh, yeah, right. Oh, what would happen if I started drinking again? It wouldn't get better. Things wouldn't get better, So that element of just keep coming back, and that expression, I've always found it uh, interesting, at least, and very telling that the phrase "keep coming back," which is recited at the end of virtually every 12-step meeting, is also what we say when we're giving meditation instructions. Keep coming back to the breath. And it seems to me that instruction holds something really key, that we should pay attention to that. It's not just something we toss off, you know. It's it's said because it really is the most profound wisdom of recovery and of dharma, which is that continuity and that showing up. Oftentimes when I speak at an AA meeting, I and I'm asked for a topic, ask people to talk about showing up because I really don't know. Everything else, I can screw up everything else, but as long as I keep showing up, it's gonna get better. Or I'm gonna get through whatever challenge I'm having. So the next thing in this section is one of the few parts of AA literature that I quoted directly in this book. It is easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Mm. A daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. Isn't that what life is, in a way? It's what the practice of Dharma is as well, until we get fully enlightened so that we don't have to, I guess, maintain our spiritual condition. It's just nirvana maintains it for us. Uh, kind of silly idea, but actually probably a really dangerous idea, that somehow we're going to get to this place that we don't have to do anything anymore. And isn't that appealing? Isn't that kind of, oh, can't I? Why do I have to keep doing this? Like, when do I get to stop? And just having this simple principle, though, um, also frees us from the idea that um, we should be more together, or that we should have crossed some line or accomplished something special or had a big breakthrough that changes everything. It just allows us to see, oh, this is just showing up again, one day at a time, one breath at a time. Uh, and well, in some sense, that can seem like, oh, I want more. Sure, we all want more, but it's also kind of like, oh, okay, great. I don't have to, you know, knock myself out trying to get it, which actually happens to be the next little piece uh, here in my book, where I talk about my brother who went to Est in the '70s, and if you're not familiar with Est, it's Werner Erhard, who was this kind of self-help guru, and it was this. I never went, so everything I know about it, I just make up, which I'm good at. So, um, yeah, and it's been satirized a lot, and it evolved. But it turned into the forum, but but there was this element of it that was like you show up and like if you like respond in the right way in these workshops, if you say the right thing, then the leader would say, "You get it." And getting it was like the whole thing, right? If you get it, then okay, you got your money, you got your money's worth of S because you get it. And and as I say in here, the trouble with that is that, well, I'll read this. The trouble with I got it, I say here, is that like every other experience, it's impermanent. Many people have similar moments in meditation, therapy, sobriety, and other psycho-spiritual practices. If they fall under the illusion that what they got is good for all time, they are setting themselves up for disappointment, at least, and possibly worse. As Jack Kornfield points out in After the Ecstasy, the Laundry, which is essentially a 10th step book, even after his enlightenment, the Buddha encountered Mara the tempter regularly. Jack says, there is no state of enlightened retirement, no state of enlightened retirement, no experience of awakening that places us outside the truth of change. That's an interesting question we can maybe go into, but I do like this phrase, no enlightened retirement, and probably many of you have heard that phrase before, and very similar to what we say in the 12-step world, right? Another really good correlation. You don't graduate, There's not some point where, okay, you're done with that work. Your sobriety is contingent upon the daily maintenance of your spiritual condition. Um, actually, I want to go back now, though, to a phrase from the big book here that says we are not cured of alcoholism. Just because it's like a kind of controversial uh, phrase, and I don't have an answer for this question of are we cured or are we not cured, but I think it's one that's worth thinking about and talking about. Many people note and many people don't like the fact that in AA people say they are recovering alcoholics. And I've had people say to me, "Well, I'm recovered from alcoholism." Fair play, as they say in Ireland. Um, maybe. Uh, and and others point out that in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they often say that, or they say, I think early on in the opening, that we are a group of recovered alcoholics, right? Um, and maybe this is just you know the language. Maybe we're not really talking about something that important, but it's important for a couple of reasons. One is that if you think that you are recovered, does that mean you think that you're not an alcoholic anymore? And if you're not an alcoholic, then are the bars still open? That's always the question. What time is it? Do I have time to get a drink? I'm not an alcoholic. Um, but also, you know what? The problem I think people have with this idea that we are not cured, that we're never cured, is that it's kind of like the walking around with the black mark or something, or that all the time that somehow you are flawed and you're just permanently flawed, and I definitely understand and appreciate that attitude, like, that you don't wanna feel that, and I don't think you should feel it. I think for me, the idea of saying reco you're not recovered, that you're recovering, that it's a process, is, first of all, the acknowledgement that, uh, that using alcohol, no matter how long I've been sober, presents a tremendous danger for me, and that it's not a danger worth pursuing. There's in the risk reward category, the reward is way less than the potential risk. So for me, it's more of a reminder, not, oh God, I'm just so bad because I'm an alcoholic. But again, I mean, my attitude has always been like, great, like, I'm an alcoholic, that solved a lot of my problems, rather than, "Oh, I'm an alcoholic, what a terrible thing to be." Uh uh, you know, but like probably most people, I didn't wanna be an alcoholic or identify as an alcoholic, and I resisted that, but once I accepted it, it was actually, like, good. So, I tell the story of a woman in my home group in LA, in Venice Beach, where I got sober, who was talking to someone who said, "I'm not sure if I'm an alcoholic or not." And my friend said, "Oh, be one, it's fun." You know, and, that to me is kind of my attitude about it. It's like, yeah, it's not like I feel ashamed of it. Anyway, um, there's no real answer to this, right? I'm sure there's like some medical diagnosis, but when we say, I'm an alcoholic, my name is X and I'm an alcoholic, we're not making a medical diagnosis. We're saying I don't think we're even talking about whether we are an alcoholic or not. Uh, I think it's just language we use to say, I'm somebody who can't drink anymore. And I say that I'm an alcoholic because that's a good shorthand for, hi, my name's Kevin and I can't drink anymore. It doesn't really mean much. And I obviously, I am just speaking for myself. I'm sure that some people, some of you maybe feel like, yeah, I'm really an alcoholic and that's my medical condition. I never went to treatment. I was never diagnosed as an alcoholic. So maybe I'm not an alcoholic. So does that mean I should go drink? Anyway, there I go. I haven't even gotten through this section and I still have a little time. Uh, and I'm just now I'm like thinking about all the thoughts people might be having right now. This is one of the weird things of the silence of Zoom. That could be a poem there, right? The silence of Zoom. Phew. I think maybe I'm done though for today. There are other good things in this section of the book, but I kind of used up my energy there. So I'm going to open it up for people to chime in or ask a question. Okay, there we go. Monica. Hi.
Hello. So to me, that's just the difference between Western and Eastern thought is this permanently flawed in Christian sort of faith in the West. And then always it's kind of it's very simplified, but I've been, I see the Asian, like Eastern thought, like Buddhism, that we are born good, but we have to keep growing in that direction. I'm saying in a really strange way, but that's and it's also for me in the program over the years, my program has definitely changed and grown, especially because I study Buddhism, but that thing about take what you need and leave the rest. I mean, I can block out some of that stuff now because I don't see myself as I mean, that was then. And I was lucky enough to have a sponsor that made me, we did we did multiple 4-steps, but she always made sure that on the inventory list that the positives were more than the negatives. To understand that we all are capable of it. It's just a matter of how much are you willing to work for it, I guess.
Yeah.
But that was just my thought that just popped in my head, and there was something else, but it went away.
As it will.
It will, because everything is impermanent, correct?
Indeed,
Yeah.
especially thoughts.
Yeah, and
thankfully.
thoughts are not things. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's interesting, Monica, what kind of came to mind as you were talking was reading a little bit yesterday, kind of about the Buddha, and I've been listening to Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's the translator of the suttas, and he sort of points out this kind of paradox in the stories of the Buddha, that there is this, in the more mythical stories, when he's born, it is known that he's going to be the Buddha. And there's all this magical stuff that happens around his birth. And we know that he's been, that for many lifetimes, he's been doing these practices and developed himself to this, so that this sort of preparation for this lifetime. And then he arrives and it's like this, mythic, historic moment. And then in the suttas, we see him struggling and trying to figure out how to get enlightened. Like he gets these teachers and he meditates, but he's not satisfied. It's not working, and then he tries all these austerities and he practically starves himself to death. He's like doing this crazy stuff, and that's not working. And finally he's like, oh, why don't I do this? And he clicks on with this another meditation and then he starts to have these insights, and then he gets enlightened. And it's like, okay, but if it was inevitable that he was getting enlightened, why did he have to go through all that? Right. So it's a little like, if I can really stretch this, it's a little like, I'm an alcoholic and I've got to maintain my recovery on a daily basis,
Yes.
and I'm recovered, and I'm good, I'm not flawed, I mean, that's, to me, is really sad and tragic that people would carry this kind of sense of, oh, I'm an addict, I'm a failure, and that's where again, as you're saying, we want to really bring in the kind of Buddhist view of compassion and forgiveness and kindness. That, oh no, like, you're good, you're fine, and really, one of the things that I like to look at is, how about, maybe I was already a good person before I got sober, you know wasn't I? Was I a terrible person? Unless you're like a psychopath or somebody who's really doing harm throughout the world, you probably were doing lots of good things, or behaved well, or were kind or generous, but you also had this other side, right? And our recovery is about taking care of that side, and then sort of allowing the wholesome side, the positive side, to come forward and be the lead, the thing that's kind of leading our life, so that we're no longer dominated by the addictive side. But it's not that we were ever just these bad people, and that by walking around with this label of alcoholic over my head for the rest of my life, I'm never going to be able to feel good about myself. That's
Well, and I don't, like, a couple of weeks ago, I I started thinking about, well, is happiness or truth possible without suffering? But I think I read that, I was reading somebody, maybe Jack Cornfield, and they actually, in the Buddha himself, said you have to know what suffering is to not
Yeah.
want it, so.
yeah.
And I and so I come back to that, and then
Yeah.
I've often had new people that I've been trying to sponsor in program, and they think we damage ourselves by talking about our past. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Monica. That's great. Todd, hi.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, all. I was just thinking, when you were reading the sections on keep coming back, that's just, my mind went directly to the right effort,
Yeah.
We keep coming back to the breath. We keep coming back to meetings. Even the quote from the big book, we keep coming back daily for that maintenance of our spiritual condition. And I was also thinking, in terms of recovery or recovered, the Buddha, who we all will take as an enlightened being, kept coming back. He kept doing his practices even after not so-called, but his enlightenment. The Dalai Lama still practices every day.
Mm-hmm.
And he's considered by many to be an awakened individual. So, I've had my share of relapses. And I think it was mainly from not coming back, even though I thought, not even thought, I'll start doing really well. I will maintain a spiritual life, spiritual practice. And I keep with that, but I don't keep coming back to AA. So that's, you know, I figure I got it solved or something. So that's the right effort I need, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what you do here, is to work them both at the same time.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking of right effort. So that's,
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Todd. It's exactly what it is, right effort. And right effort is all about a balance. It's not about striving so hard that you create stress, but it's also not about like, oh, just kick back and let it all flow. Like I don't have to do anything. And showing up to me is kind of, yeah, the essence of that. If you don't show up, nothing happens. That's the bottom line. You know, if you don't go and sit on your cushion or your meditation spot, you're not going to meditate. If you don't put time and energy into recovery, and really, you know, it's like that. There's one of those silly lines about alcoholism, ISM, incredibly short memory, you know, uh, which is one of those good lines. It's like, I keep forgetting that I'm an alcoholic. Well, it's interesting to understand that the word sati, which we translate as mindfulness, actually is founded, it comes out of a root that's about memory. It's about remembering.
Yeah.
And to remember to be present, to remember to be mindful, to remember to meditate, to remember that I'm an addict, to remember that when I'm suffering, it's because of causes and conditions, not because I'm a flawed individual. All of that, there's like, it's a whole, yeah, that remembering is like the kind of the coming, is the keep coming back, is remember to come back, you know?
No, that's very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I got to remember my last drink also.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that is right. That's kind of the root to me of recovery, is remembering what happens when I drink.
Yes.
Like it's not just remembering that I'm an alcoholic, but remembering what happens, remembering what would happen. You know, that's definitely what keeps me coming back. I
Agreed.
want to give Gabriella a chance to speak.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And it was nice, Gabriella. I could see you like nodding along today, and I
Oh,
always,
yeah.
I kind of notice people's reactions sometimes. So I always like that when somebody's nodding. I want everybody to agree with me because I'm right.
Um, yeah, I mean, what a great conversation. I think for me, there's that, in the beginning, I was like, oh, fuck, excuse my language, like I'm an alcoholic. But then there was that awakening of like, but now I know,
Yeah.
right? Like now I know what's wrong. And there was
Yeah.
so much in being an alcoholic. I mean, it just, I look at it like, not whack-a-mole, but more like an octopus. Like what arm, what tentacle is around my neck at the time? Because mine turns into, I'm in other programs for eating disorders and
Yeah.
Al-Anon and this and the other thing, like spending and it doesn't matter, right?
Yep.
But to take the morality out of it, like I am not. I mean, I am conditioned, and there are things that I do that I'm working on. But it's like when somebody says, you don't blame people for having cancer. You don't think they're a bad person for having cancer or for having diabetes, but they have to take their treatment. They have to take their medicine. And I think it was my sponsor she said, I live my life today, so I don't have to use tomorrow. And that just implies like every day you're living your life in a way. So it doesn't, I don't, because I've had in the beginning, it took me 2.5 years to get sober. I couldn't put 30 days together. It was awful.
Mhm.
And then remembering, you were talking about coming back, and everybody was talking about coming back and remembering. I think it was Tara Brach that said, or she heard somebody say, like, the most important thing is remembering the most important thing. And that is like, that's it, right? It's like,
Right.
just not, don't, like, remember, like that, like Todd was saying, that last drink, I got to remember where I go when I'm making a decision. Is it bringing me closer to a drink or farther away, or creating, um, peace and serenity, or causing chaos, which I'm very good at doing in my own head. So anyway, I'm just so grateful to be here, and thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thanks. Well, and you got me thinking about what are for me the much broader meaning of when I say I'm an alcoholic, and when I first said that, what it meant much more, and it it was all about the dysfunction of my life. It wasn't just that I was drinking and using; it was my inability to deal with life, and a lot of that inability was my inability to keep coming back, to just show up for stuff, and to be consistent. Uh, uh, excuse me. And so again, like when I use this term, it's just this shorthand. When I use this term, I'm an alcoholic. It's this shorthand for all this stuff, and a reminder, and that remembering. Well, and when you say remembering what's the most important thing, um, that's also for me the most important thing is the Dharma, because that's the biggest, that's the truth, and my alcoholism is part of that. But the bigger thing, and I've talked about how I felt on the night of the election when I was afraid that the former guy, as they call him, was going to be elected, and that I just went into this state of despair, and then just reminded myself, like, I take refuge in the Dharma, and the Dharma is bigger than all of this. Uh, and that's the most important thing for me. So we are well past the ordinary time, although there is uh, nothing that stops us from going on, uh, other than my tea time. But I do have time to let Joe speak. So let's let Joe have the last word. Or, well, I'll have the last word, but we'll let Joe be the last other person to speak.
The good news is, Kevin, this is very short. I just want to say that I love this group. Every time I listen to this group, it raises my spirits. I actually think that the Buddha may well have meant his teachings for people in the trenches. And I think sometimes when I go to that pretty place in Marin County and talk to some of those people there, that, see, this is kind of a judgment, obviously, but there's a lot of dilettantes, that are playing with Buddhism and, oh, isn't this interesting, and so forth. But the people that I've heard talk here, when you talk here, this is where the rubber meets the road, I guess. And I just so appreciate it. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I feel much the same way. That either definitely the Buddha was talking about suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path to ending suffering. And if you are not really in tune with that first truth of suffering, then you're not really going to engage in the whole process that he's talking about. You're not going to take it seriously. As you say, it's going to be something interesting to you and intriguing, and a philosophy that you like. But people in recovery, we don't have the luxury of just being interested in something philosophically. This is, for us, it has been and continues to be a life or death issue. And since that's what the Buddha was interested in too. So it's not so much that I think he was talking to addicts, but rather that he sees the human condition as being the condition of addict. He didn't use that language, but that's clearly what he is talking about. and I see Joseph Goldstein now uses that language as well. And so I think that's you're right on with what you're saying. And it's it's why I enjoy working with people in recovery. And there are some fairly senior teachers who are in recovery who don't want to work with specifically with people in recovery because they see it as like it's kind of like a niche. I don't want to be limited to that. Myself, I prefer it because I'm not interested in being with people who are halfway there. I like the wholeheartedness of people in recovery and people who are serious about recovery and who understand the implications of the Four Noble Truths. And that's what this community understands. So I'm with you there. I love it. So that's a nice, rich way to end together. Thank you all, dears, for coming and for helping me through these times. And it's really become something very different from what what I imagined this was. This is just kind of our life together now. So keep coming back.
Namaste.
Namaste. I'll see you all.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank
Be
you.
back on Friday night.
Blessings.